Hello, everyone. I am coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States. I really wish I could join you, and maybe I will at another time. But I'm excited to be here. This is really interesting. Congratulations for still hosting these types of events so that we can all learn. So I have a short time box, so I wanted to get some information out to you of some of the different things that we've been thinking about at scrum.org. So very direct, the title of my talk is if you want your teams to be more curious, you have to facilitate better. And this thing about curiosity hit me a while back during the pandemic, mostly because we were all stuck in our homes. We're trying to do what we can, and people were talking about continuous improvement. I think about enterprise and leadership and different ways that we can work with teams and scale teams. And I was like, oh, don't tell me to improve. I don't want to improve anymore. I'm okay the way that I am, you know? So, and it started to, I defined myself and what does that mean and why I wasn't thinking about different things. So I did some research and thought about it in our context. Scrum.org, if you aren't familiar with it, I see some different professional Scrum trainers. We are global, focused on training, education, and community, helping people and teams solve complex problems. You can see the lovely gentleman in the right-hand corner. That's Ken Schwaber. He is the co-creator of Scrum and the founder of our company. So a little bit about me. As I mentioned, I focus on enterprise agility and learning enablement at scrum.org. So my direction was thinking a lot about before the Titanic, right? Organization, Scrum, Agile, what are we going to do? And I found that more and more, and I talk about measurement, more and more, it's hard to turn that ship. So what can we do with things like different skills that we can help individuals and teams that if you choose to leave that company, you can still use, and what can we do maybe as a collective to kind of grow that and have that better thinking. So when you think about scaled Scrum, you think about me, maybe I have a background in organizational behavior, startups, product development, management. And I used to live in France, but now I'm back in Boston. So just a quick thing to get started, some more things that you might want to know about me, because in 3 months, I'm actually going to come to Israel and I'd like to organize a party. And it's going to be my birthday party. So I need your help organizing. And I would love to understand your ideas because I've never been to Israel. I don't speak the language. I have Michal there. And so things that I like are champagne. She likes something a little stronger. I like cake. I like music. I don't know how to swim, but I like the beach. So I'm going to ask you all in person, just together, talk about what would this party look like and start every sentence with yes, but. And for my friends, knock, knock, who are virtual, chat with me in the Zoom. I want to see what your ideas are. So help me organize this party, but start every sentence with yes, but. Let's do this for 30 seconds so I can see your ideas. If you have an ability to chat in Zoom, I'd love to see it. If you don't, I can hear you talking in the audience. So give me 30 seconds. Okay. So let's try that again. I'm still coming to Israel. I still want to have an amazing party. I love music. I love seafood. But start every sentence now, your ideas, with yes, and. Yes, and Patricia will pay for the party. Do another 30 seconds. Okay. So what my hope is that I one day do end up in Israel and we can have this fantastic party, is that when we think about the difference, and I'm sure you've heard about the yes, but and yes, and, is that we find that curiosity or find that, that openness to not say no, the no that gets stuck from us and is actually something that we learn. So as children, at the age of 4, I think these children are really the original creators of the Ask the Five Whys, which we always tell management, ask why, ask why, ask why. That's a child, right? And so at age 4, children ask about 300 questions a day. They're unafraid, right? So, they're looking at the world differently. What's interesting, what I found interesting was that at age 10, when they start going to school, the why questions, why is it that way? Why is this that way? Why is the sky blue? Those questions actually get reduced almost to 0. And so they don't ask that type of question. And at the age of 14, our teenagers, and maybe this has changed a little bit, but at age 14, there's no exploratory questions, and they're very practical questions. So it's, teacher, can I go to the bathroom? Mama, can I go to my friend's house? What's for homework? What's the passing grade, right? So it's really bound questions, and they're not exploratory. And it's really replaced with us trying to figure out how to kind of figure out the rules that we should be playing in, and then a little bit about maybe how to break those rules. But it's not really about exploration. And the other thing that we find is that people in authority, so whether at work or at home, they start to ask questions that don't explore exploratory thinking. They're actually asking questions. So when we start to ask questions to children or people that work for us or with us, is we start to ask them questions where we know what answer we want. Did you do your homework? What's the status on that? What do you think of this? There's always a little bit of leading that's built into us. So what does that mean for us? And what does that mean for us in a professional manner? Well, it matters because when we think about how curiosity, especially for us in our industry and what we do, it actually stifles curiosity if we're not aware of this in the workplace. So the reason that curiosity is important, beyond the, I'm very curious about this. And when we think about how we talk about it in that a certain way, is that it's related to the way that we learn in our brain and our memory and functioning. And there's a lot of neuroscience around this that's really interesting, but there's a lot of, if we explore different things, especially when we think about older people or, the age of my parents, the more that they can still think about things and have a desire to learn, that's how we strengthen the brain. And I know Ifly may have hit a little bit on this in her last talk. It also is important to us in terms of professional growth. So a fundamental of how we can actually get promoted at work is that there's a perception of, if that person is curious, they actually will be able to excel in the workplace. And then another reason is that when we think about the future of work, so I used to work for a research company, one of the things that they found people were most nervous about was about artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, all these things. But as we see, even with ChatGPT, right now at least, machines don't feed the why. We put the parameters in, we ask the questions, we give different requirements. And so the curiosity to think about what is possible is there. And why am I talking about all this? Because I'm finding that it gets lost. It's gotten a little lost for us in terms of, we're still doing Scrum and Agile and, how we think about goals. And so I want to think about this because it does have an effect on how we approach Agile. And so when we think about what's future-proof work for companies and for workers, there was this survey that was done in 2018, and they asked a bunch of executives and also individual contributors, what are some important characteristics when we want to think about the future of work and in terms of the behaviors you're looking for? So communication, yes, we want people to talk to each other. Professionalism, that's great, 29%. That's the brain of Scrum.org. I love that. But curiosity is only 4%. And like I said, curiosity, the science of curiosity is really important, but it's interesting in terms of what we do today, because the characteristics that you're seeing, 36%, 33%, communication, commitment, self-motivation, professionalism, passion, it reinforces the status quo. It says, we care about people who think and act and believe in the same things we do. We do, yes, we do. But if we always think about those things, then that's how you lose diversity. That's how you lose different perspectives that we can do to challenge actually some of the things that we're working on. And so when I think about our day-to-day work, and how we think about our strategies and what products and initiatives we're going to pursue, it becomes very interesting because we should be able to challenge and be curious about the things that we're working on and how we can help our customers. So what happens is if we don't do that and all this innovation is locked at the top, right, where executives say we can be curious, and what's most important is that it comes from us, we know that the valuable ideas are getting lost and closed from the teams. And Scrum.org and McKinsey a couple of years ago now, and this might have changed a little bit, did some own survey work. And we found that 63% of team members feel that they're empowered to decide how they'll work toward their goals. And that's not exactly what we're looking for. It's not terrible. It's not surprising. But when we see things like 41% of team members are empowered to challenge goals, 60% don't feel like they are, 61% are just reporting status updates. Those are the kind of dysfunctions where we say, hey, where was it? Where is this mindset that we can be curious about goals? We can throw them away if we don't think that they're right, or we don't see the data. Where is the curiosity that's coming? And so what I'd like to propose to you now is really think about how can we use that and inject that back into Scrum, where I truly believe that the Scrum framework is a continuous improvement framework. And when we think about Scrum, what would it look like if we're just going through the motions, and what could we do to try to do that? So each sprint, there's an opportunity, and I'll go through some of the events. So for instance, in sprint planning, when we see that the product owner is just telling us what to work on, the PBIs, we're just looking at the activity and, you know, what widget we're going to create. That's kind of what we usually see, right? And actually, some days we might be happy about this when we see people pushing back on the dependencies and, you know, hey, actually, we do have success criteria, and that's just, you know, the work is done. I'd really like us to get more curious and to put more rigor and be more curious and ask questions like, if we deliver these things, how will we know that they have value? So that we're not just churning out things because somebody told us to. How do we collaborate on solving problems together? And we're thinking about success as feedback on value delivered. Why is this useful for the customer? And I have a lot of text on these because afterwards, I would love for you, if you need to be able to look at these comparisons and start to bring them into your own context. Let's think about the daily Scrum. You know, there's many, many dysfunctions at the daily Scrum that you can see, but a couple of them are when you just come and it's a status update. Or everybody's just really focused on their own work. So it's just a collective of individuals coming. And so the curious stance is be open with what people are struggling with. How can you help each other? Where is that alignment factor? How are we working toward that goal? Is it still relevant? We need to be curious and think about those things. It's driving that focus. The sprint review for the non-curious stance. And, you know, every event is a status update to stakeholders. That's what a lot of sprint reviews look like. And when you think about, I'm laughing because when you think about how expensive a sprint review is, it's very interesting. But the conversation is mostly around activity and output produced and PBIs completed, right? So, you know, oh, let's get this list and we're going to talk through each one. Okay. And this can come back to bite you, right? Because when you come back and they say, oh, why were you doing this? This isn't what we expected. Why were you working on this? It's because of that non-curious stance. Whereas a curious thing to ask is, what's the most important piece of feedback we're trying to learn? Think about that before you get into a sprint review. Have a curious environment that you can create where stakeholders are thinking about value and what's missing. Be open enough to look for those gaps together and explore the results, look at evidence, think about things in terms of experiments, hypotheses, and how that can drive insight for us into the next sprint. And then the retrospective. So everything is okay. You know, transparency is low. We don't want to have conflict. Let's just get through this meeting. It's not going to change that much anyway. There's another thing that I think is interesting in retrospectives when you see a team that's very focused rather than what's going on inside of our world and what we can really affect immediately. is really focused on having sessions talking about other people or management and leadership and other teams or different circumstances. And they tend to do that because it's cathartic. So we're upset and we can, I'm trying not to curse. So we can talk about other things and how they're terrible and this is really sucky and all those things. Whereas if we're really curious, we're thinking about radical transparency and we're trying to be open when there's conflict and really listen and give opinions or just be there to support each other and work safely toward the goal of being a better team. This is what creates the sustainability of us being a performing team. And talk about, was this a good or bad sprint? Use open-ended questions, be very focused and try to evoke curiosity in others, but be curious about what other people are thinking. So those are some ways that we can think about how we might improve the different Scrum events with curiosity and what we're looking for. But you may be saying, oh, Patricia, that's very nice, but I can't even get people to talk. This is me. This is actually me. I do this a lot. But 73% of employees do other work during events and in meetings. Especially when we're virtual, we're multitasking a lot. 90% of people daydream in meetings about their next holiday or what they're going to do, what they're going to have for dinner. And so the idea is that we have to think about those events. They're there for a meaning. They're the minimum that have to exist. How do we make them effective? And that is what I think about when I think about how can facilitation really help us. So today you've probably learned some different techniques. I'm going to give you 5 principles now that I hope you can think about when you're trying to, one, really ramp up your meetings and events, but also to engage a bit of curiosity back in a very meaningful way, not way that's super cute. So 1, and these are based off of 5 principles. 1, have a clear purpose. So when you've been to a meeting, and this is terrible for me, is when, have you ever been to a meeting and you wonder why you're there? So when you're facilitating your meetings, really think about what is the purpose, what is the goal that we're trying to achieve? If not, what you end up with is a lack of structure and people kind of wonder what's going on. And the other thing that you might have is if you have someone who doesn't have a lot of experience facilitating meetings, is that they might use things, and there's so many good facilitation techniques out there, liberating structures, tasty cupcakes, all these kind of things. But they use the fun exercises as a replacement for what we actually need to achieve and get done. And there's a place for that to create a certain environment. But the randomness will lose someone's attention. And if you're like me, it will lose my attention and it's probably not coming back. And the next meeting, I'm probably not listening to that strongly. So have a clear purpose of why you're there and tell people the plan and be transparent about what's going to happen. Number 2, so the first one is purpose. Number 2 is stay focused on outcomes. This is the notion of outcomes of when you bring people together and it's nice for them to think about things and they can explore different situations, maybe have a conversation. But this is when you come and there's 2 or 3 people and they are just talking about, for us, it's been the Super Bowl. Balloons in the sky. They're talking about, what happened last weekend. It's just going on and on and on. And we're not thinking. So what happens again is people check out. So as a facilitator, you really have to think about what are those boundaries, think about the purpose, and have some judgment and flexibility to be able to kind of almost conduct the meeting like an orchestrator. Conductor who would keep everyone involved, but also, not let things get too far off. So purpose, outcome. And then the third one that we want to think about is facilitating the process and not the content. So you want to pay attention to the environment and group dynamics, and also recognize that anyone on the team can facilitate if it's clear and agreed upon, meaning that it's not always the Scrum Master that needs to facilitate. It's not always a product owner that needs to facilitate a sprint review. But when you're doing that, clarify your role, because this has happened to me in a couple different instances where you're not sure of the person facilitating what their intent is. And depending on how you feel about that psychologically, it can seem intrusive and you start to question why they're there. So it can go two ways. You might have, for instance, a coach or a scrum master who's all of a sudden injecting things because they want to participate, but you're kind of wondering, hey, I thought you were just going to be neutral and facilitate. So one way to deal with that, let's say if you're a scrum master in a sprint retrospective and you are doing that, just tell people, hey, I want to act as a team member here. Here's what I want to say. There's a limit to that. Be careful. So for instance, if you're a product owner, you say, I'm going to facilitate the sprint review. I'd like to solicit some feedback from the stakeholders. Be careful and just say, hey, today I'm facilitating. I really want to listen, to not anchor people's ideas and opinions. Because once you do that and you have a stakeholder who thinks they're very important, they're just going to say, yeah, and then go that way. And you're anchoring people's opinions and ideas. So that's another reason why you want to be clear about your role. 4, drive to decision. What events do you guys have where you see that the decision really isn't being clear and made? For me, that's probably the sprint retrospective. But we want to think about driving to decision when we're facilitating. So, there's different techniques to do this, but what's more important is probably thinking about that process, thinking about the time box. And those things matter because what happens is at the end, even if you've facilitated a really nice session, if there is no decision, it was a really nice session, but we don't have a decision. And so there's things that you have to think about, because when you get close to a time box, especially when you're facilitating, what tends to happen is that people just rehash and re-say what they've already done, what they've already talked about. Whereas what you're really trying to get to is who is going to address this? What are we going to address? How are we going to do it? So even if it's like a retrospective and we say, hey, here's 3 things that we're going to do. Well, how are we going to do them? Who's going to take a look? Those things, those are the important conversations. Which items are we working on? I've seen a backside of that where, we've been in a retrospective, we couldn't decide, but hit the time box. Scrum Master said, oh, I'll just decide. And that's not how it's going to work, right? So think about how those decisions will be made, avoid repetition, advocate for specifics, and really understand that facilitation is not just in the time box. It's what do we have to do to prepare, right? So for instance, a sprint review, what am I looking for feedback on? And what are the next steps that we're going to do? 5, ensure participation to create shared responsibility. Patricia, what do I do when people aren't talking? And I say, that's okay if people aren't talking. But what's really terrible is when you have, when you make a decision, but you don't really believe in it because you would just like to move on. This is what's important about ensure participation to create shared responsibility. So there's a couple different things going on here where we have to understand there's discomfort and people like to avoid conflict. Culturally, maybe that's a little bit different depending, but we want to know that everybody's voice is valued and heard. So here are where interesting techniques can come in, where maybe you're doing silent writing, you're doing dot voting, you're doing all these different techniques. Be careful with those because some make sense, some don't. But the most important thing that I think is when we're creating that shared responsibility is that we understand how and who makes the decision. And you can see these things come up when it doesn't. So for instance, as in a team and during the daily scrum, and I'm product owner, the daily scrum, the team member, the developer asks, hey, so should I just do this now or go work on these other things? And I'm confused because a couple of days ago, we went into planning and we had agreed and we had talked about those things. So it means that something didn't work. And this is where you look at the different events where maybe we didn't drive to decision enough, and also the understanding and the responsibility and the agreement of what we were going to do together wasn't really understood. So this one is really interesting also because you want that discomfort in teams. We're having creative ideas. We're looking for that diverse experience, diverse in terms of ideas, diversity. And so this is going to happen, and that's what we have to address. And this is really back on the facilitation principles of participation and participatory. This is one of the most important. This is going to relieve some of those issues when you think about hey, we went into planning, we thought we knew what we were going to work on because refinement was really great, but now all the developers are saying we don't believe in the goal, we want to work on these things. And then people just agree because they want the meeting to move on because it happens all the time. These are the kind of dysfunctions that you're trying to work on. So you can see when I'm talking about these things that facilitation is complex. It's a skill to be developed. Think about those principles that can be helpful. At Scrum.org, we have a lot of information that talks about the principles and it talks about the different skills. And then within that area, you'll also find some different techniques, liberating structures that you can use when you're looking at specific events. So that information is there for you. And that's at scrum.org, professional-scrum.competency/facilitation. But there was something that I really wanted to make sure that people understood when we talk about facilitation, because the other thing when I'm talking about orchestrating is that what we want to protect, what we want to enable is that self-managing team. So what I was thinking about when I've been, we were developing a course, so there's a professional Scrum facilitations course, is how are we not to be too heavy-handed, right? What do you have to think about when you're working with a team of how much facilitation is needed? And so thinking about the level of facilitation, there was two aspects that I was thinking about with my colleague, and it was the dimensions we would look at would be team effectiveness and contextual complexity. So this is about the how much facilitation and then ways to facilitate. That's all over for you in Google. You can find those things. But the team's effectiveness, when you're thinking about the level, is what is their experience and what is their track record of being able to collaborate effectively? Can they deliver? Can they self-heal? So can they have discussions and can they self-manage? So self-healing is we have a conflict, we get through it, we understand, we're better. But this is really focused also on that ability to deliver value. And then I think the other one that we have to, especially post-pandemic, is think about the context. So contextual complexity is talking about one, how complex is the type of consensus and commitment that we need for that work, right? So is it everybody agrees? Is it one person says that? And then what is the internal and external environment? So within the company, within the team, is it hybrid like we are today? Are your teams like that? That makes it a little bit more complex. External environments, what's going on in the world? What's going on in people's personal lives that might affect how they're thinking and where their mindset is. So for instance, if you look at this 2x2, on the top left-hand quadrant, you might have low contextual complexity. And let's just say you have high team effectiveness. So you would need no to light facilitation. So this might be a team that was working together, they've done stuff together, and then let's say they're all remote. So they've worked together, they've actually delivered together a product together, and they work on that. And let's say they're going to work on a new product. They probably need no to light facilitation if they're in a brainstorming session. Now let's say we've gone through some brainstorming, we've done all this nice thinking, design thinking, all these different things. And then some of those people come together and we're going to start planning and we're thinking about how to build that product, putting together the product backlog. We probably move over because the contextual complexity is a little bit higher to light to medium facilitation, upper right-hand corner, because we might have to think about, hey, how do we organize the times? What is the call to action? Because some of us aren't together. What did we miss in some of these different conversations? So it moves a little bit over there. And so let's say they're working together in that way. They have to plan a little bit more structure around things. But let's say, like in the United States, we're having recession problems and all of a sudden 4%, 5%, 6%, 7%, 10% of the workforce is laid off. Now you have a lot of external environment, higher complexity. So that's going to bring us a little bit into more facilitation because there's more contextual complexity. We're not delivering, we're upset, we're losing people on the team. And we need to have somebody who can come and just kind of support us a little bit. And it doesn't mean that they have to do everything. Context always change but maybe we need somebody to facilitate us in conversation. to guide us a little bit differently. So there's this way of thinking that I've been thinking about it, that, how do you know when you have to have a heavier hand? How do you know when you need to stand back? I think a lot of us know that almost naturally if we've been doing this a lot. But it's just a way to really think about those things. When is there more or less structure needed? So I hope that's helpful for you. On this slide, I have an InfoQ article that these ideas were published on, and also a blog that recaps the five kind of principles for more effective meetings. So I think I am doing really well in my time box. Thank you very much. I hope that was effective for you just to think about curiosity, a little bit more about Scrum, and then of course, how you can facilitate to make that better.